Welcome to Innovation by Design, a podcast that explores how design thinking drives innovation across the architecture, engineering, and construction industries. I'm Evan Troxel, joined by my co-host Candace Kitchen. Candace, please introduce our amazing guest today.
Thanks, Evan. Our amazing guest is Chris Heine. He's an architect and strategist at SmithGroup in Detroit, focusing on healthy, sustainable design that's good for people and the planet. Outside work, he's usually chasing down interesting food spots or playing shows with his band, The Science Fair. So Chris, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? Where you started? Where are you now?
Yeah, so I grew up in Southeast Michigan in Ann Arbor, and I'm currently in Grosse Pointe. I work for SmithGroup in Detroit. So I've been working at SmithGroup in the architecture field for about 20 years, and I'm currently a family man with wife and kids trying to manage the band on the side when I have a little bit of free time.
Nice. What instrument do you play, Chris? We need to know because of my backdrop here.
Yeah.
I need to know.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I play guitar as well. And I've been playing guitar most of my life, and it's been a really great kind of creative outlet. There's times when I had wished I could have been a professional musician, but I feel like I found my calling in architecture, and it's great just to have a nice hobby that I can have on the side.
So was that calling before exposure to architectural education and becoming an architect, or was it after?
I feel like it was really around the same time. It's kind of that end of high school, early college when you're like, oh man, this would be a really neat way to go. And you kind of have to pivot one way or the other. And luckily I could kind of keep both. I think also I'm probably a better architect than I am a musician in terms of trying to make money and make a career at it. So I think it worked out.
Chose wisely. I was in a similar position as well, but I found the music thing, I found it earlier on in high school and stuff like you, but then I actually got really serious about it once I started having kids, and like that plus architecture, and it was just way too much. And I think to parallel what you're saying, it's like I think I picked the right place to land, but I still love to play. So anyway, personal stories, all good stuff for the podcast. I'm curious, you said you spent 20 years at SmithGroup. I'm sure things have changed over the 20 years that you've been there.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've kind of been all over the map. When I first started, literally right out of high school, I got an opportunity for a summer internship to do administrative work. So there were papers in the office back then. So There were people that needed to manage those papers. So that was kind of where I got started. And I came back kind of every summer if they would still have me. And then when I finished up my undergrad, I, just kind of kept coming back, and they offered me a position, and I've, moved through a lot of different roles throughout architecture in those times, and, doing office work, some historic preservation, some healthcare, some higher education, sustainability. So it gave me a really great kind of broad base, working with a lot of different people, getting exposed to a lot of different things before I kind of found my niche within the firm.
And that niche is?
So I'm a strategist. So that's kind of a fancy way of saying that I'm a problem solver. So dealing at different scales, from building scale to campus scale, and kind of everything in between. Definitely with focusing on sustainability and creating healthy spaces for people is something that's really important to me.
And what's that team look like? Is it a team of many, or is it a team of you?
Yeah, so team of many. So we have several strategists in the Detroit office and throughout the Midwest, and we have other groups throughout the rest of the company as well. So we're kind of broken up on a regional basis within 4 regions, and then that's kind of a duplicated structure across the rest of our offices.
The sustainability, what's the right word? It's not a label, but obviously this is a category. This is as far as like a professional career goes, a lot of times many people in architecture could choose to focus on a thing that is really the thing that they are pushing in these, especially in larger firms, right? There's lots of room for specialization in larger firms. And obviously you didn't start in sustainability, but sustainability is a thing that's been around probably, for a very long time, at least since the 60s that I've been aware of. But as far as like something people talked about when it came to the construction and healthy aspects of buildings that you mentioned a minute ago. But when you started 20 years ago, I bet at a large firm, it wasn't maybe part of the lexicon as much as it is, definitely not as much as it is now. So I bet you've seen that change a lot over your career.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I first started, it was kind of new to everyone. So it was kind of in alignment with, as I was learning things in school, I was picking up on some of those same things in the office. And what I realized was everybody was still kind of trying to figure it out. And there wasn't a whole lot of people really like taking charge on it. There were a few people who, were more interested and more aligned with that. So it was a great opportunity for me, being a junior architect, to say, hey, this is something I'm interested in, and I'm trying to learn more about this. So when those opportunities would come up, they would seek me out and plug me into those situations. And I think, we have grown so much as an industry and, as a firm. It's very different environment than it was when I first started. And I feel like a lot of that just has to do with sort of the aggregated knowledge that, we've all picked up on, increased transparency with products and things like that. So, we've gone a long way. There's still a long way to go. But I think it's also encouraging to see that there's a lot more fluency in terms of having those kind of conversations where people know what you're talking about. And it's not something that you have to mention on the side. It becomes more central to, a lot of project conversations these days.
That's a great point, because I imagine the conversations probably started as, do you know what this is? And do you have it? And now it's kind of evolving to, hey, I know you know what this is. Do you have it?
Yeah. And I think too, it's something where when we were probably first starting to have those conversations around sustainability, it's kind of what I would call more responsible design decisions. Because when you think about kind of the continuum of sustainability, most of the things we're doing are really just trying to do less bad. So we want to get to that point where we're doing more good rather than just less bad. And a lot of the initial things that we were doing was just trying to figure out, like, okay, how can we do a better job at what we're doing? We know we're not there yet. And that's something that we've been able to advance in our firm, and other firms are doing the same thing, where we're actually getting towards net zero carbon buildings, whereas that was something that was kind of unheard of 20 years ago. So, we're all kind of moving in that direction. And I think trying to educate our clients as well. We have some clients who are really sophisticated, know exactly what they want and how to get there. Others, not so much. And we have to offer a little bit more of a helping hand and kind of help educate and lead that conversation. And a lot of times they're happy to go with us. They're like, yeah, that sounds like a journey we want to be on. We're just not sure how to get there. So, there's definitely a partnership in that way too.
Sustainability has so many aspects to it when it comes to the practice of integrating that into the practice of architecture and delivering projects. And you mentioned there's like the big version, which is, okay, say you've got a higher education campus and they've got a lot of buildings, and all those buildings are being designed by different teams, but the overall campus needs to have a kind of a sustainability plan when it comes to energy use and carbon and healthy spaces for the occupants, the students, and the professors, and everybody, administrators. And then you mentioned transparency in products, right? And so there's a huge gamut there. So maybe start with the bigger picture aspects of sustainability that you're dealing with as a strategist at a large architecture firm, and kind of take us on maybe just a couple of the points along the way of thousands, of course, that get down to what does transparency in building products even mean, and why is that important?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think your example with higher education is a great one, that they're looking at really the entire ecosystem of their campus. So they're looking at the energy consumption of the buildings and how that relates to their carbon footprint. They're also looking at the materials that are going into those buildings. So thinking about, kind of the long life, loose fit, how can they get the most out of those buildings without having to demolish or build new, and then just everything in between. So all the operations, the purchasing, and all that happens. So we want to look at that as holistically as we can. And then also thinking about kind of the resilience angle of things, of, understanding what are the risks associated with that particular area or particular topology. So there's things that we can embed into the design to make it, more resilient. But then I think also thinking about materials, that's something where once you're starting to get down to that more granular level, that's where the really important decisions happen. And that's where the transparency comes in, because we want to be able to let our clients know what is in the products that we're specifying, where it comes from. what kind of an impact that has, what kind of a carbon footprint it has, so that we can let them make informed decisions. So that's one of those things where business as usual is I'll use the same thing I used last time because it worked
Absolutely.
well.
Yep.
But really questioning that and realizing, okay, like what is the lifespan of this product? What does that look like? What is in it? What are the risks associated with producing something like that? So those are the kinds of decisions that we like to get into on a more granular level with our clients to educate them as well as ourselves, on making those decisions.
Well, you said something that I think is really important, and it's, okay, we're going to put it into design. And so it speaks to getting it in early. And I imagine that that's a really important aspect, because when you're trying to make these changes down the line, it becomes more expensive, becomes harder to put it into the building. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, and that's the thing, I think, for most design decisions when we talk about it, it's like, let's get it on the table early so that we can plan for it. We can understand what are the costs associated with it. What are the decisions that come further down the line associated with that. So I think when you kind of look at like our design diagram, there's a lot of kind of, iteration and things that are all over the map at the very beginning. And then we're starting to get really honed in on more specifics of that design. So the more we can kind of understand and the more kind of known knowns we can get nailed down early on, the better we'll be when it comes to the end of the project. So especially when we're looking at products, the more information we have and the more coordination that we can do with the manufacturers and the vendors, that makes a tremendous difference for us, because that allows us to better understand everything that's going to be going into that product and how that's going to mesh within the greater ecosystem of the project. So it's really important to have those conversations and to have all that information available early on so that we can get those things dialed in.
Just thinking about all of the different aspects that building products bring to the environment that maybe people don't think of, because most people are just consumers of environments, meaning they participate in, they live in, they go to work in, they pass through, but they're not involved in that design process of all of those kind of intricate linked decisions about all of those aspects, like how much does this carpet off gas? What about the glue that is being used to glue it down to the floor? How far is it traveling from where it was manufactured and to get to the final destination? How is it getting to the final destination? Like you speak about this granular nature of choosing and selecting products when it comes to these buildings, in the thousands and thousands of products that actually make up a building. It starts to reveal the complexity of what now is like table stakes day-to-day architecture, right? And it didn't used to be like that. I mean, building plan sets used to be 20 sheets back at, in the 30s, let's say. And now they're hundreds, if not thousands of sheets describing all of that information, which includes written description and specifications. It also includes graphic description in the drawings. But to the level of kind of a number of decisions that have to be made on figuring out what buildings are made of and how they're configured is incredible. And so, the complexity has gone up. Has the process of doing that gotten better in the near term for you? And by better, I just mean a little bit easier, because it just sounds truly overwhelming. Yeah,
no, I really appreciate that. And it's funny, quick story. We have our office in the Guardian building in downtown Detroit, which is a Art Deco skyscraper from 1929. It was originally designed by designers from SmithGroup. It wasn't called that at the time, but Smith, Hinchman and Grills. But we have some of the drawing sheets up in our office, and it's just sort of like an elevation of make it look like this.
Figure it out.
That's what it did, right?
There was so much punting in architecture back then, right? It was like mechanical systems. The contractor will figure it out when they're installing it based on some requirements. And now it's so dialed in before it goes to construction.
Yeah, and that's where I'll give a lot of credit. I know LEED can be kind of a political thing for some people. I think it's been really transformational for the industry in terms of setting up a framework for kind of understanding what some of those metrics mean. So like when we're looking at health product declarations, or we're looking at environmental product declarations, which are kind of the nutrition facts that you get on a cereal box. These are the things that we get for architectural products. There is so much involved there, and it can be very overwhelming, especially when you're like, I just want to pick out a carpet and I just want to, pick out, some trim to put on there. We don't have to have this huge conversation about it, but we want to understand, obviously, all of the things that you just mentioned. So we want to know if there are endocrine disruptors in that chemical that we're using. So having a framework like LEED, it kind of breaks down like, here are the things that you want to look at, and here are the places you want to start. And that's been really helpful, I think, for probably most designers to just kind of have a foundation. And I think so far we've started with just the elements of the transparency. So does the product offer an EPD or an HPD? Like, that's great. We're going to start there, and we're going to, give preference to those vendors that provide transparency. And then the next part of it really is actually going through and vetting and making more informed decisions based on that information, which can be a little harder because sometimes the only product that you have available maybe doesn't have the transparency that you want. So you need to search out a little bit more. But it also lets us leverage a little bit more with those vendors and manufacturers and saying, hey, we really like your product, but we also really want to know what's in it, how you make it, so that we can sleep better at night for the designs that we're building for our clients.
What does that process look like? Like, walk me through it. Maybe I'm an architect at your firm. Do I ask you a question? Are you asking the questions? How does it start?
Yeah, I think really as a team, we're usually starting with kind of a palette of the materials that we would expect to use, kind of based on the character and the typology of the project. And then that's where we can start to get into some of the choosing by advantages, say, where we're looking at what some of the different products offer. And understanding that we're not always going to be able to pick the thing we want, because sometimes there are proprietary things that we have to do for different topologies. But that allows us to have a conversation internally. So we can talk amongst our team and say, hey, we're looking at product A and product B, and product B is substantially better for the environment. It might cost a little more, but we understand that that's something that's important for the client. So we can start to weigh some of those options and see what makes the most sense.
I'm just coming back to this idea of how complex, like just the things you're talking about, most people don't ever think about that stuff. Like, you want carpet, you go to the carpet store and you pick out the color and the feel and maybe the cleanability. But you're like, what is the chemical they use in this? And you also mentioned LEED getting us here. That endeavor, which has been a long process and it's evolved many times over decades now, to help just get this stuff to be table stakes in the built environment when it comes to how projects are actually built. I mean, thank you for pointing that out and kind of giving kudos to that as that framework. But now speak to this idea of these things being table stakes, because there's a lot more awareness when it comes to, the cities that are allowing these projects to be built. They're involved in the process too. It's not just the owner and the architect and the contractor anymore. There's, not that it maybe ever was, but there's permitting agencies that have requirements for the buildings to meet, and there's so many different levels to this now. And sustainability, I think, maybe used to be seen more of as a nice to have or an add-on at the end of the design process. Let's make this sustainable now. Where now it's like, okay, again, go back to this idea of table stakes of this. Can you talk about kind of how you've seen that shift throughout your career?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right on. Whereas, early on when people were starting to talk about LEED or even just understanding the whole kind of sustainability conversation, it definitely was kind of like an optional add-on thing. Mm-hmm. And some of the early adopters, like a lot of the institutional clients that we work on, once they started to establish, say, a carbon neutrality plan, all of a sudden that puts that, at the front of the line of, okay, we understand we're going to design a beautiful building, but it also has to be 50% more efficient than all the other buildings on their campus. So we have to start strategizing how to do that. And same thing with LEED, where if it was an optional thing where a client said, yeah, we'd like to have the plaque on the wall because it, reflects well on us. That's one thing. But if they're saying we absolutely need to hit LEED Gold or we're not allowed to build this building, that puts a completely different, perspective on it and makes it, I think, more well integrated into the DNA of the project versus just that kind of add-on thing. So it kind of gets the whole team into that mind space to understand, like, okay, any decision that we're making, we have to put through the lens of these responsible design decisions, not only because they'll affect our chances at LEED points, but also just in the perspective of sustainability and health and wellness for people. Each of those decisions that we make are going to impact those things, and that's something that we can build into the bigger conversation of not just making it look nice, but it also has to perform really well, and it also has to be a really healthy space.
Can you talk about those frameworks of, gold, platinum, and then like the scorecard idea, just so that people understand what you're dealing with behind the scenes, where that plaque ultimately ends up on the wall? And like this whole thing is voluntary, right? It's like building owners don't have to participate in this. Maybe in certain circumstances, there's a larger framework in play in a county or something that says all buildings XXX whatever, why would need to be a certain level. But if you could kind of explain that side of the equation here, because I think a lot of people don't understand that or haven't heard of it before.
Yeah. And the LEED scorecard basically is made up of several categories. So it's around the site and location of the building, water use efficiency, energy use efficiency, materials, indoor air quality. And within that, there are some prerequisites that you absolutely have to meet as the minimum threshold to get the project certified. And then there are points that you can pick to get to the threshold you want to get to. So if you just want to get certified, you need to pick 40 points, and you can pick that from wherever you want on the checklist. And then it goes up from there to 50 points, 60 points, and 80 points for platinum. So as LEED has evolved, it's also changed in being more stringent and more aggressive. So the different versions that have been out there, like when I first started, we were looking at version 2, and a version 2 platinum building might not even get gold these days because energy codes have progressed and the requirements have progressed. And I think just also thinking about when we were first looking at these things, a lot of it was based on operational carbon. So your energy sources, and then how much energy you're using. And now embodied carbon has become a huge topic, and I think we're also kind of flipping over the rock and seeing that there's a lot more under there than we initially thought. So that's been really eye-opening to understand, like, okay, we haven't even talked about the embodied carbon that goes into building our HVAC systems, for example. Whereas we can say, okay, we've made a lot of strides in our flooring and furniture, but there's a whole big part of it that we haven't even gotten into yet. So I think LEED has been really helpful in kind of pushing the industry in the direction that we feel we need to get to address some of these things. So as these things come out, it's really kind of a living document in a way, so that it's addressing kind of the needs of the present and the future. And it'll continue to evolve over time. But I think also it's really helpful as a goal setting tool, as we acknowledge that, you can say we want to get to, gold certification. We figure out a path to do that, and we pick out the strategies that make the most sense for that project to get there. But then also just as a framework to understand, like, these are the things that are important that we need to address. And if there's something that you're not able to get, say there's a specific point that we're not going to get that, let's talk about why that is. Is it because it's a strategy that doesn't align with this project, or is it too expensive? Or, it brings up a lot of those conversations that you wouldn't have otherwise. So it's a healthy tool in a lot of different ways.
I've been thinking of an analogy here, and so this may not come out very well, but okay, so LEED points are more like basketball than they are like Yahtzee. And here's my reasoning, okay? So in Yahtzee, you have to roll a certain hand of dice to, be able to put it on the scorecard. Basketball, like, nobody says, okay, you have to win, you have to hit 100 points, and you have to say 20% of them have to be 3-pointers, 50% of them have to be regular, and the rest have to be free throws, for example. So it's like, okay, you've got a goal of 80 points to hit platinum, and you get to pick and choose how you're going to get there. And so that's my analogy. I feel like design teams have a lot of leeway to figure out how they're going to achieve that goal. And then at the end, you actually have to prove it. So there's like this whole design process of, okay, here's how all this adds up on paper. And through really advanced 3D computer modeling for energy analysis and all of these different things. And there's lots of people at the table, architects, consultants who are doing, MEP design, and they're doing landscape design, and all, they're thinking about stormwater, and they're thinking about transportation adjacent to the building and how people get there and how much bike storage there is. And there's all these different aspects to it. Like, it's super, super wide open. And then there's the proving part. Can you speak to that, the commissioning part? Because it's like, yeah, we did it on paper, but then the building actually has to perform, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And yeah, I think that's something that we've had projects where the commissioning maybe was not built into the original project plan. And it's something that we say, if you did all of these things during design, but then you're not making sure that it's operating properly, there's not really any point to doing it at all, because that's
Right.
really the seeing it through and making sure it's working right. So if you're operating a building at say 50% of the efficiency of what it should be, if you're going back and looking and saying, okay, why is this happening? You can dial in and say, okay, well, it looks like there's some inefficiencies in the water system, or there's something where these thermostats, aren't working properly. So it gives you the opportunity to go back in and understand, what are the things that aren't working properly in order to make sure your building is working as it was designed. And another piece of that is the educational component. So the building facilities people need to understand how to best work the building, because everything's going to be a little bit different depending on the seasons. The MEP systems might perform a little bit differently. So kind of having that guidebook to understand how to operate your building is just as important as designing it to be efficient in the first place.
Designing efficiently, I think, to me, it makes me think of two things: active and passive. Could you explain the difference between those to people who are not familiar with the architectural design process?
Yeah, so when we look at passive design, it's doing things for the building that are kind of inherent to what that system looks like, versus designing for active strategies is more like putting solar panels on the roof or something like that, where we start with all of essentially the built-in strategies that will get us as far as we can go. So we want to make sure that, especially in a climate like here in Michigan, that we're insulating really well, that we are positioned on the site in a good way, that we're making good use of the solar heat gain that we want, or keeping out the solar that we don't want, and making it as efficient as possible so that we get that envelope all set. And then we can bring in our MEP engineers to really design around that and really just dial it in. If you start with a really crappy envelope and you have a building that's not going to perform well, you're going to have to way oversize your MEP systems, and it's, just makes it harder for everyone. So from like a strategist role, part of what I like to be able to do is coming in early on. We can do a lot of analysis on the current climate, historical climate data. We can do climate projections. And there's so much more information that's available, especially with AI now, that streamlines a lot of that so much more, that we can start iterating on design a lot sooner and a lot more efficiently. And then we can really get things dialed in so that when we are putting in our active systems, it's a lot less, that we're getting as far as we possibly can before we even start designing for that.
Candace, I have a question for you. You are in Michigan, correct?
Correct.
I am in Oregon. Do you feel like the climates are different in Michigan and Oregon from each other?
Absolutely.
Softball question there. Okay, so because Chris brings up location, right? And every building has a physical location on the planet. And I think a lot of people think that if I want a new house, or I want a new office building, I'm going to go to an architect and I'm going to say, I have these ideas, these pictures of other architecture that I really like. And maybe it's like this English Tudor thing that I saw in a magazine, and maybe it's this Danish design or Scandinavian design or something like that. And I say, I want an office building. I want it to be like this. And what Chris is saying here is, like, actually the climate dictates how architects design in that region usually, right? Because climates are different, and every building being in a physical location on the planet, like if I was building something in Brazil in the rainforest, it would be very different than what it would look like in Michigan, right? So my point here is like, you can't just say make the build. It's not just about aesthetics. It's not just about these pictures, right, Chris? It's really about, like, passive design is really inherent to the region and the climate that that building is in, even its location and orientation of the building on the site. And so these are kind of the first principles that go into passive design strategies, because the more you can handle earlier on in passive design strategies, the less you have to do with active design strategies. And those typically increase cost, right? It's like the more you can do that's inherent to the site, the orientation, the way the sun works, the way the way it captures the wind or pushes the wind away, like whatever the things are that the building needs to do to function properly, that can be addressed through these really early architectural principles, actually makes it easier to address those with less active, costly. They're not always costly, but a lot of times they are, like these solutions that come on later on in the design process to make up for the deficiencies that maybe we can't address with passive design. Does that sound right?
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, if you think back, okay, 300 years ago, how were we designing our homes and places that we were existing when we didn't have air conditioning? We didn't have electric heat. There were very specific ways that we would do those. And to your point, we were responding to that immediate environment. And we got to a point where with our technology, we felt like we could basically overcome that anywhere and just throw a glass box anywhere on the earth. And that's where we get into that trap of, okay, well, it looks great, but it's not performing well at all. And that's where we can kind of, harken back to, those early design inclinations and understand, like, okay, how can we build something that is adaptive and resilient to our unique climate and our unique place? And I think that also adds a level of authenticity to the design, that you feel like you're rooted in that place. Whereas it's not like every city you walk into that has a bunch of glass boxes, you could walk around and say, I don't know where I am. But we like to think that if we're designing to respond to our climate, then that kind of gives that immediacy in our regional design, and kind of gives you that sense of place.
I love that we're digging deeper into this too, because, maybe I'm an architect in Detroit. Times have changed. I'm not just working on buildings in Detroit. I might be working on a building in Oregon, and I have to think about, what does that mean for me? And to Evan's point earlier, with everything, it's so much. There's so many details. So I imagine you have some sort of database that you keep all of this in, because how could you possibly remember it all?
Yeah, no, that's a great question too. Our technology and practice group has done a lot for benchmarking and recording all of the data that we already have. And I think that's a huge opportunity for any design firm, is thinking about, okay, you've done how many projects before? How do you keep all of that information? And how can you reach back to see, okay, what worked well here before? What are some of the lessons learned from that particular location or topology? So we have a really robust database of data from all of our projects that we can go back to. And then I think the next step from that is, how can we more actively monitor, say, the energy use of some of our buildings, so that we can understand, retroactively, okay, how are they performing? The energy model said this. Is that reality? Is that really happening? So there's a lot more that we can do with it, and a lot further to go. But I think, especially with AI, that's something that we can, pull up that data really quick and start to make some correlations and connections with, so that we can make more informed design decisions in the future.
Yeah, this is also one of those things that has really changed, right? Which is this ability to record data at all of these different sites. You do a project and there's all these sensors, there's the building management system, there's environmental controls, all of these things. And now we have the ability, like almost everything has the ability to send information back to a central repository. And that didn't used to be a thing. So we actually can learn from our buildings after they're built. Could you just touch on this idea, though, that traditionally architects, once the building is built, they're not hands off, right? They're on to the next project. They've provided their service that they were contracted for. And now you're talking about extending that, at least the interaction with the clients in the building, beyond occupancy through usage and through, training people how to use these new building systems so that they can actually operate those, because it's probably different than the last version of building that they operated. And just talk about the shift that we're seeing there so that we can really capitalize and leverage that information that is being captured to inform the next buildings that the architects design.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so critical. I think building in a feedback loop is helpful not only for the continued operation of the buildings that we design, but then also, to your point, to be able to use that to build on our knowledge base for the next ones. And I think we get into that fatigue of, well, there's so much data, there's so much, the Internet of Things. But if we can kind of have a plan for how to structure that, what are the data points that we want to understand and what are useful for us? We don't need to know everything, but if we can kind of pinpoint what are those, key important things that we want to keep track of, that are going to be the most meaningful for us, we can kind of build out a plan to keep that feedback loop going so that we can monitor those things. And a great example of that is our office in Detroit. We renovated about 5 years ago. We went for LEED certification and WELL certification. And part of the WELL certification is having an ongoing feedback loop dialogue with post-occupancy engagement. So not only having sensors that are making sure that we're, meeting our temperature thresholds and air quality and things like that, but also we do an annual survey for all of our staff in the office, and that gives us an opportunity to look back over time. We designed the space before COVID, and obviously in the 2 years that we were renovating, a lot happened because it was right during COVID, where we were, everybody was virtual, and then people were hybrid, and then we were kind of coming back to work. And there were a lot of lessons learned. There was a lot of variability at that time with the way that the building was operating, the way that we were using the building. So it's been really helpful to be able to revisit that conversation every year and just kind of keep track of, okay, are the things working the way we wanted them to? What's not working so well? How can we address that? So being able to do that with all of our projects at scale is a tremendous value for not only us, but also our clients.
You're making me think of when I was working in an architecture office, of all of the cubicles or the workstations, and some people would be wearing blankets and they'd have a heater on under their desk, like literally a space heater, and then other people had a fan blowing on them because they're overheating, and everybody kind of has these differential temperatures that they work, and some people are working in direct sun and they've got to have some weird anti-glare thing on their screen, and other people are in a dark corner, and et cetera, et cetera. And what I think of now is with these really advanced kind of computers that have the ability to control the shades at different, maybe there's a sensor on the glass that's actually saying, well, we're getting a lot of direct sunlight, let's lower the shade right now. And then later on, the clouds come in and the shade goes up automatically. And these things really now there's a lot more going on technology-wise to control the personal comfort levels of the people working in the spaces, right? Rather than just thinking about it as one big space, everything's equal. It doesn't really work like that anymore, right? I mean, we're starting to get these really amazing controls, which also have their own layer of complexity, and those things break down and things have to be addressed, and throughout time. But things have changed a lot in kind of the automation part of buildings to try to keep people comfortable.
Yeah, and I think going back to the whole, passive versus active discussion, we can go in and we can model ahead of time, looking at the massing of, if it's a new building, where are those areas of sun that we know are going to make it very uncomfortable, or where there's going to be a lot of glare, and we can start to look at those things early on to try to mitigate some of those things as much as we can, so that we don't have people who are sitting in direct sunlight, or we can program the building such that we can use circulation spaces for the areas that might be more problematic with glare, so that you don't have somebody's desk, right there in that afternoon sun. So we can get that dialed in as much as we can. And then to your point, then that's where we layer on those active strategies. And, it's really, you can take it as far as you want. There are the electrochromatic glass products where you can, turn on and off the tint like almost instantaneously. So you don't even need shades. And then I think the building management systems that we're using, building automation systems, can be so much more responsive, and there can be so many more data points that we can dial in, more directly about, where we need to have heat, where we need to have cooling, to make those things more comfortable for people. But I think also we've looked at strategies for an open office environment where if you don't have assigned desks, if you have a free address, people can move around. So like in our office, we don't have assigned desks. So if we feel cold, we can move to an area of the office that might be a little bit warmer. If there's too much light, we want to just kind of hunker down into a more private space, we can go find a space like that. So I think really looking at strategies across the whole spectrum of, passive, active systems, or, even just kind of organizational strategies, we want to, think through all of those things and figure out what makes the most sense for our projects.
I love these conversations because it makes you think about the things that you would have never thought about before. Like me, I'm going into buildings and I'm looking at the doors. You're probably going into buildings and thinking, hey, was this intentional? Like, are they doing this for some specific reason? So I can only imagine now I'm going to be looking around for the intent of maybe the layout of the building.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, that's one of those things, just going back to my original training as an architect, is everything is design. And you may not notice that when you look at it, but somebody made a decision, and whether it was something they were being very intentional and specific about, or if it was just checking the box because that needed to happen, exactly to your point, you can really start to understand, like, okay, were there reasons that it was designed this way, or is that just kind of how it was done? And I think that is really helpful just to grow as a designer, to, be more mindful of those things and really, thinking about the work that we're doing, and then kind of questioning some of those assumptions so that we can do better in the future.
Chris, it's been a wonderful conversation. It really shows the depth at which firms like yours is operating at. We're going to have links so that people can learn more about SmithGroup and you in the episode show notes. Thank you so much for taking the time to go through all of this with us today. It's been really wonderful.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.